It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, our very own Maureen Muldoon.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome. Today is week 2 of the four agreement series. And we talked last week about being impeccable with your words and being kind and encouraging when speaking to others and to yourself. And I hope that you did spend the week playing around with this little tool that we gave you about self-talk. And, that's not a tool that ends in a week. You can develop that and develop that and develop that. And this week, we're going to be going over the other 3 agreements. Don't make assumptions, don't take anything personally, and always do your best. And it seems like maybe a lot to cover, but all 3 of them can be boiled down to one: cause no harm. If you don't assume, if you don't take anything personally, if you do your best, you will stay above the fray of the egoic personality. And Don Miguel breaks these down for us. He, the author of The Four Agreements, says that finding the courage to ask and to be direct, to ask for what you want, to learn how to express and to ask for what your soul desires, to really advocate for yourself, is how we avoid making assumptions. Being clear will avoid all forms of harm. What happens in vagueness stays in vagueness. Communication with others as clearly as possible will help us to avoid all kinds of misunderstandings and sadness and drama. So mastering this one agreement can completely transform your life. But this one thing is not always easy. I mean, so often I hear people still saying things like, I didn't know what to say, or I didn't know how to express how I felt, or didn't know like it was okay for me to speak up. And so I just stayed silent. If you feel this way, which is sometimes I feel like I used to have this algebra teacher who was a terrible teacher because she knew algebra so well that she could no longer teach me. She couldn't tell me the basic idea. She could no longer access my pain point. And so sometimes I feel like that a little bit with talking because I feel like, come on, just do it. But if you feel this way, if you feel stuck or stymied around your own truth or communication, you don't have to accept that. Even if that's how it's always been. That would be like accepting a gag order from the ego. So we must learn to speak our truth and to combat the fear that keeps us silent. This is a repetition of the first agreement, basically. Number 1, to be impeccable with your words. Martin Luther King says it like this. He says, in the end, we will be remembered not for the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. I found that to be so powerful. And in his letter from Birmingham jail, which I think is one of the most incredible piece of writings that you'll get to put your eyes on, he says, we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and actions of bad people, but for the appalling silence of good people. We've heard that silence is golden, but not if it's birthed in fear. Silence birthed in fear is not just complacency, it's violence. And I know that that might sound strange to you, but if you don't speak up when you're supposed to speak up, you could be the cause of great suffering. And we find this out in the Bible story about Queen Esther, who gives us a beautiful example about facing your fears. She's basically just this regular Jewish girl being raised by her uncle Mordecai, and she's brought to the palace because of her beauty. The king was looking for a new wife, and he chooses Esther to be his queen. Suddenly she's living this completely new life in which no one knows her background. No one knows that she's just this Jewish girl. And if they find out, it would not be a good thing. And so one of the king's royal officials, Haman, he gets into this, it's a very big story in the Bible, so I'm just giving you the cliff notes, but he gets into this thing with Mordecai where he moves through the palace and Mordecai doesn't bow and Haman is really pissed at him. And so Haman goes to the king and he says, you know what? All the Jews need to be killed. And so Mordecai finds out about this plot and he goes to Esther to petition the king to stop this pending genocide. But of course, Esther's like, whoa, like, don't get me involved, man. Like, this could be the end of me. She's afraid for many, many reasons. First of all, no one is allowed to just approach the king without being summoned, or they'll be put to death. That's like one of the weird rules that this king happens to have. And, you could go and try to approach him and he might, extend his scepter to you and grant you not being killed, but you can never be sure. Even if the queen goes and speaks without being invited, Esther could be put to death. But Mordecai challenges her and he says, "For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" I don't know about you, but that like stirs something in my soul. He is essentially saying, you have been ordained for this moment. There is no mistake. You are perfectly positioned to speak truth to power. So Esther says to her people, okay, we're going to fast and we're going to pray. And I love this first step in eloquent communication because it gives us the permission not to jump the gun, not to come, guns blazing to the situation, but to turn away from the story as Jesus turned away from the story when he is approached for the accusers and the adulteress. In that other Bible story, he looks to the earth as Esther looks to the heavens, and they both look away from the problem at hand. They're not interested in entertaining the problem. They're seeking a sacred solution. So she asks her people to fast and pray. And then she risks her life by approaching the king after 3 days. She's ready, she's done the work. She's worked on her consciousness to be able to have this conversation. And the king grants her her wishes. And in fact, in the end, Haman is the one that gets put to death, which you never like to see anyone get put to death, but nevertheless, that's the Bible story. So, like Esther, we can't remain silent when we're called to love. We have to come, and we have come for such a time as this. You have come for such a time as this. And so we must learn how to advocate for ourselves so that we can advocate for others. You're not learning to use your words impeccably just so that you can become an impeccable speaker, but so that you can have an impact, a greater good in the world. People say all the time, public speaking is second only to the fear of death. But do you want to live a life in fear, or do you want to die in a life of truth? So to speak truth to power requires that you set yourself aside and you replace your fears with some fierce faith. So you can be accountable for your own spiritual legacy. Will you leave for your legacy a map of how you just circled the rug of your own living room? Is that what you want to leave? Will you leave a pre-made coffin the size of your body indented in your couch for all the hours that you devoted to the boob tube, scrolling other people's lives? Is that what we want? I know I'm asking rhetorical questions. We don't want to live these lives where we never actually pull the trigger and move past into a greater degree of our awareness, of our creativity, of our impact. As I was sharing earlier, one of the writers from our writers group at Speakeasy, Joan Llewellyn Burns, received her first copy of her first book. And I'm saying her first because I know that she has many other books to come. It's a memoir, a collection of stories that's called It's Not Funny, But I'm Laughing Anyhow. It's every single story is a resurrection story about motherhood and life and, just all the ways that she got through things with humor. It's part of her legacy. It's honoring the fires that she's come through. And it's a beautiful thing. Your life deserves the same. It deserves a life that's lived in truth, but no, not in the murky waters of fear. If you tell the truth and have direct communication, you will find yourself living above all of that, that stagnation. You might say, but I'm not good. I'm not good at finding my words. I'm not good at having conversations. I'm really not good at advocating for myself. So what? If you're not good, then be bad. If you're called to speak truth, then silence is not an option. And the option will be that you will have to have some of your most awkward, glitchy, stuttery conversations that you've ever had. But that is just where you begin. And if you do not begin, if you continue to tell yourself, I'm really bad, I didn't have the words, I just didn't say anything. If you continue to live there, you will never, ever, ever reach your true potential. That is not what you want. You don't want to die and meet the person in heaven that you could have been. Colum said it this way last week. He said, anything worth doing is worth doing badly. Let yourself be bad. Kill off your perfectionism. To learn to ask the harder questions, to speak up, to not assume. Don Miguel says, do not assume anything. And then he goes on to give us another little trick. He says, don't take things personally. He says, don't take things personally because nothing that other people say or do has any bearing on you. What other people do is a projection of their own reality, their own dream. So when you become immune to the opinions and the actions of others, you will no longer be a victim to needless suffering. Oh, when you're immune to the opinions and actions of others, you have reached a certain degree of spiritual maturity and liberation. And man, that's awesome. I have to say, there was a long time in my life where I did not have this, where I would wonder and worry about what you thought about me. What the, I mean, sincerely, a fucking prison is what I created for myself. I even worried that you would judge me about the words that I used. And if you did, you know what? That was about you. That was not about me. I had made peace with myself. I've come to make peace with myself. I've come to realize that I don't believe that even if you think something badly of me, I don't believe in that because I do not believe in bad words or bad people or bad things. I believe that there are people who are scared. I believe that the fear of some people inspire them to do harmful things, but they are not bad people. They are people who have fallen asleep to their own ability, and that is totally forgivable. But I beg of you, do not be one of those people. You begin to fall asleep when you begin and continue to assume things, when you continue to take things personally, when you decide to just phone things in. It's a low level consciousness that you must attempt to move past. So finally, Don Miguel asks us to always do our best. And this sounds sort of pedestrian if you ask me, like, do your best, like sounds like a Hallmark card. But here's the thing, only you can. Only you can do your best. No one else can do your best. And if you skip out and leave your square of the great mosaic of God empty, you are actually doing a disservice to everything. You actually are quite important to the plan of God, as it says in A Course in Miracles. Your best, you know, your best will change from day to day depending on how you feel. If you're sick or if you're well or if you're disheartened or if you're excited, your best will look different under any circumstance. But if you do your best under any circumstance, you're doing your best. We like to say, and I like to think, like our parents did their best. So it's such a healing concept, and it helps us to avoid self-judgment. It helps us to avoid self-abuse and regret and comparison. So all three of these agreements can be found in the story of the lotus. When the lotus rises, she goes through the honoring of her own right direction and her intuition. Even when the waters are murky, she is this beautiful, sure arrow that is always moving to the light. And eventually she arrives because she does not allow herself to be stifled by the confusion of others or defined by her environment. She does not make meaning of the murky waters. The waters can't stop her, can't taint her. The waters have nothing to do with her. She passes through them at the most perfect pace and in the most optimal degree without comparing herself or her progress to yesterday or to others. She does her best. Don Miguel and the Toltec wisdom that he shares in these four agreements are designed to bring us to the light like the lotus. The Buddhist philosophy uses the lotus flower as a symbol of enlightenment, of arriving to the light. The flower moves through these murky waters, and yet it keeps rising. And when it reaches enlightenment, it shows no trace of trauma. It seems like a miracle. And in the end, it's true for all of us. We will come through some stuff. You have come through some stuff. And yet you don't need to be tainted by it. We will be trespassed, raped, cut down, crucified 100 days, 100 ways. That's life. But when you reach the lawns of heaven, and I'm not talking about death, I'm talking about enlightenment, these shadows, scars, these scorecards do not need to define you. In fact, none of them even travel with you. God sees your perfection as you were, as you always will be. God does judge, but has judged you as good and has not changed her mind. So we don't have to take any of that baggage with us either. And as we arrive into this awareness, we, like the lotus flower, get to meet up with reality, that which is real. In the Course of Miracles, it says that nothing real can be threatened and nothing unreal exists. What is real is love. We get to, as we move in love, get to meet up with love. Love meeting love. What is real meeting what is real. Light meeting light. And honoring that dignity and that potential that lives within all of us. See, in the end, the essence of the Queen Esther and the essence of the lotus flower and the essence of the miracle worker and the Catholic and the Buddhist and the Baha'i and the Baptist and the devout, recovering alcoholic, the essence of anyone who follows the light and truth and has faith in God's love, the essence of anybody who places their faith in a higher power, no matter what they call that higher power, the essence of that one is conviction over complacency. They have a conviction. They have a conviction that within themselves, at any given moment, at every given moment, they have the ability to overcome any problem or difficulty that they may encounter, and they have a faith in their capacity to transform and transcend suffering. And again, not just for their own good, but for the betterment of every sentient being. So we possess this power because we are inseparable from the fundamental laws that underlie all of life. What is that law? That law is love. It's so simple. The knowledge that you have possession of this power is a sign of one who has activated their Christ consciousness. And at a time, when we maybe first came through the murky waters of our, environments, we might have been told, you do not have Christ consciousness. One man has Christ consciousness, and it's not you. So you might have fallen asleep to that mythology designed by an ego that was invested in separation. So waking up to the fact that you are Christ consciousness can be a little unnerving, and it might want to, keep you in your comfort zone. But Christ lives by the law of love, and Esther lives by the law of love. And from that space of grace, they could deal with not just what's at hand, but they could heal what's at hand. Being a healer, like Angelus Arians talks about in the fourfold way, the warrior, the visionary, the teacher, and the healer. I've always been quite reluctant around claiming my healer, but nevertheless, that's who we are. This is the Bodhisattva, the being who has attained enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, not just to be enlightened, but so that it can be helpful. Now, there's a very thin threshold that you need to move through in order to arrive at this state. Now, there are many, many doors, as I've pointed out, that to get to God, but there may be 1,000 million doors to get to God and to awaken this God-given power that lives within each of us. But the thing that makes every single one of those thresholds almost impossible to move through, probably absolutely impossible to move through, is that none of them include holding grievances against a brother. So that's the stop. That's the block. Lesson 68, and this is our Course in Miracles moment for those who follow Course in Miracles. Love holds no grievances. Love can't flow into that greater consciousness while holding a backpack of grievances. Navigating through these thresholds includes the desire to transform suffering, the desire to live a fulfilled life, the desire to contribute to peace in the world. Contributing to peace in the world seems like, wow, yeah, easy peasy. Peace is our goal, we say here all the time. We get it. It's what happens automatically when you know yourself as Christ knew himself. You move in peace. Living a purposeful life, a healthful life, easy peasy. We get it, right? It's, it happens automatically when you know yourself as Christ knew himself. It's easy to be helpful. And then finally, transforming suffering. Okay. I don't know about you, but not so easy. If it were easy, Esther would not hesitate. If it were easy, Jesus would not hesitate and spend the night in the garden. Transforming suffering, it's not always easy. We don't always get it. It can be the thing that keeps us stuck in the threshold as we scream to the heavens, God, why is this happening? But when we ask why, we say it's because God has forgotten us, obviously, but it is not true. What has happened in that threshold when you're stuck and screaming to the heavens, you have forgotten yourself. You have forgotten who you are. Now, transforming suffering is also the thing that happens automatically when you remember who you are. When you reconnect with who you are, you can transform suffering. You can transform suffering, all suffering. by finding ways not to get hung up and finding ways to move past those tainted waters and not taking it personally and not making assumptions. Actually, the very first step to transforming suffering may simply be to see suffering for what it actually is. It's simply a call for love. And if you're seated in your Christ consciousness, that call for love will activate itself. It will activate the perfect actions, or the perfect stillness. It will activate the perfect words or the perfect silence, according to what would be most helpful to the plan of God. I remember one time this happened to me a lot, but this one time I just remembered I was at this wedding. Funny enough, Jesus' first miracle happened at a wedding too, when you turn the water into wine. But anyhow, I was at this wedding and I was sober. I was probably the only sober person there. These two guys I met up with, they were my brother's friends, really good guys when they were sober. When they were drunk, they got kind of nasty, as people are known to do. Suddenly they started facing off each other and there was going to be a fight. One of them was little, one of them was very big. And the very big guy, like I knew him a little bit better. And I was like, what is he doing? And I was like, this is not what love would have us do. And I found myself stepping between them. Like Esther, I was like, this is not my fight. Like, I do not want to get harmed in the making of this dream. But I found myself stepping between them, putting my hands on the bigger man, looking into his eyes and saying, you are so much better than this. You are so much better than this. You are so much better than this. And I had to just keep repeating it until he remembered. And then he did. And it dissipated the whole thing. So I didn't know how to do that, but the Holy Spirit in me knew how to do it. We will see suffering as a call for love, and we will look for examples of way showers in our lives who have also shown us how to move through that threshold, like Christ, like Queen Esther, like Martin Luther King, and other deities that are actually designated specifically to help us move through thresholds. Because St. Patrick's Day is right around the corner, I have to give a nod to St. Bridget, who most recently got her comeuppance with her own day. Thanks again for the International Women's Day for women who continue to, fight for equality. Anyhow, St. Bridget was born in a threshold. Her mother stood in the doorway, one foot in the old, one in the new, one in the day, one in the night, and through the threshold of this barn, she's born on February 1st. Between the indoors and the outdoors, the winter and the spring, the day and the night, the middle spaces, the spaces that are unclaimed, like spaces between inhale and exhale, they go unnamed, and yet the space is so extravagant for transformation. Her birth speaks of what happens when things get uncomfortable, when things get tight in the old and the new is not yet arrived. And we have to be the ones to step into it, to step into the unknown and the undeclared, and to allow ourselves to arrive in the mystery. Man, I didn't know what was going to happen when I stepped between those two men. Actually, I did know what was gonna happen. I had my ass kicked a few times back in Jersey, so I knew what to expect, but I allowed myself to move in what I had never moved before, which was love. So her birth speaks of what happens when things get uncomfortable, when things get tight. And we get tight and we want to, instead of birth forward, we want to, retract. And we have to be aware of that. When we're complete in our classrooms and we're ready to move into the next realm of our consciousness, but we're, fearful of it, we just get to breathe as the woman breathes when she's birthing the child. Just breathe and you will dilate. Just breathe and you will find your way through. Almost the only thing you need to do is continue to breathe. And if we're painstaking about this phase of our evolution, we will move through the threshold. We will see doors where there once were walls. And in that liminal space, we'll find ourselves or lose ourselves, either pushed by pain or pulled by vision. You'll be pushed by pain if you linger too long in the comfort zones. It will feel uncomfortable. But being pulled by vision is not all a day in the park either. That can be kind of painful as well. It calls us to pull up a certain degree of trust that we've never known before, cut ourselves free from our comfort zone. This threshold asks us to move into, again, the mystery. And if we don't take it personally, if we don't assume, if we don't phone it in, and instead if we attempt to bring our A game and move into the mystery, this space where ego has no hold, you will find something so extraordinary there. You will find something you never knew existed. like I found that power with that man, like Esther found that power, like Christ finds that power. So before you assume something, there is always an opportunity. Just take that opportunity to know, to activate maybe curiosity, to activate what the Course in Miracles says is open-mindedness. Before you take something personally, there's a threshold, and you can move into a greater liberation or you can fall back. Before you at all times, there's a threshold. There's 1,000 thresholds that are all around us, that we're moving through all the time. And they're all asking us the same thing. Are you going to choose love? Asking us, to move into a greater idea of ourselves. And we stand at each invitation with Bridget's mother. Are we going to birth this thing? Or are we going to abort it? Or are we going to abandon it? Am I going to step into this newness, or am I going to fold on myself? That's the choice. And we tend, for whatever reason, to shuffle our feet in reluctance on the doorstep, because we know that this invitation, and that every invitation is also an annihilation. We are birthing, like St. Bridget, past a threshold, but also we're killing off that which no longer serves us. And that can be scary. We also have the story of Ganesha. He was known as the keeper of the thresholds. His symbolic presence adorns and protects the entranceway of many homes and temples worldwide. I have a little spiritual crush on Ganesha. But he isn't just a keeper of the gates, of a threshold, of the physical realm. He guards the doors of your perception and influences your senses and how we experience the subtle elements. And we can call upon Ganesha to dispel our negative talk, like we talked about last week, and to keep out of feelings of self-doubt. Those blocks are self-doubt, and we all have them. So because God never steps backwards, God always steps forward. You can be sure that to grow your consciousness, it will not include regurgitation, running around your own carpet in your living room. It will require you to do new things that you've never done before, things that might scare you a little. But if you're not a little scared, then you're probably in your comfort zone. So there's one more story about a threshold that I wanted to share with you. And it's about Buddhism, and it's about the lotus flower. And Buddhism actually began with the spiritual journey of Siddhartha, who lived in India some 200,000 years ago. It began with this idea of the Lotus Sutra. It is the most influential of his teachings. And it's an expression that says that everyone can become enlightened. So the Lotus Sutra's universal appeal allows all of us to move into a greater idea of ourselves. And the sutra, when it first came into being, actually moved across the globe. It went to China and Korea and Japan. And there was this one particular teacher. His name was Nichiren, and he's a 13th century Buddhist teacher. And he established the practice of reciting the Lotus Sutra, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. It's just another path that can assist you on your walk towards enlightenment. He wanted to enable people to be free of the inevitable pains of life. And because of this, he's known as the awakened one. And he was persecuted because he was so passionate about this teaching of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. He was so passionate about it. In fact, he felt like all of Buddhist teachings was boiled down to this one sutra. And he was persecuted, and because he was persecuted, he suffered, and because he suffered, he used this mantra, and because he used this mantra and he recognized that it actually worked, he became even more invested in his teaching, and he established this practice of reciting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo as a practical way for people to focus on their hearts and their minds and upon the laws of love to manifest its transformative power in reality. So Nam comes from the Sanskrit namas, meaning to devote or to dedicate yourself. So Nam-myoho Renge Kyo is a vow to yourself, to never yield to difficulties, to know that as big as your problems are, your God is bigger still, to win over one's suffering, to be the person who doesn't go around telling everybody how broken they are, but how brilliant they are. That's bold. And you look at some people who practice Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, like Tina Turner. Man, like, did she even ever age? She just stayed brilliant her entire life. Cher also. I don't know if this chant will mummify you into staying young forever, but Those are just two examples of people that I know. So Myoho can be translated as mystic or wonderful. So I'm devoted to this wonder. And Ho means law. I'm devoted to this wonderful law. And Urenge means the lotus flower that is pure and fragrant, unsullied by the muddy waters in which it grows. Again, it's a symbol for our own beauty and our own divinity that's able to transform through suffering. So I am devoted to this wonderful law of transformation, basically, is what it's saying. And the interesting thing about the lotus flower is also that most flowering plants, they develop into fruit after the flower falls away. But that's not the truth with the lotus flower. With the lotus flower, when it develops into a flower, the fruit is right there. And in many places, you might see Kuan Yin standing in the lotus flower. She's like the fruit of the flower. She's a deity that talks to us about compassion in pain and suffering. So the fruit of the lotus flower develops spontaneously with the flower. And when the flower opens, the fruit is just there. As soon as you move through the threshold, this is at least what it says to me, as soon as you move through the threshold, as soon as you allow yourself to stop playing small and instead rise and shine, you will be gifted with the fruits of your labor, and it will blow your fucking mind. In the same way that when I stood between those two men, I didn't know what I was doing, but something bigger in me came out, and I was like, what? Like, I can transform this suffering. I can prevent war. I can turn an ancient hatred into a current love. That you can do as well. So finally, the final part of this sutra is Kyo. And this is the Chinese character Kyo, which also implies the thread of love, the thread of the law of love that weaves our entire tapestry together, our lives, the thread that tethers us to truth, the thread that tethers us to each other, the thread that tethers us to God. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And that's the word.
Okay, so the ball's in my court for one moment here. That was absolutely stirring, as always. I love what a great storyteller you are. And I love how you find the stories that really illuminate what is going on, I think, in my life and in everyone's life here for the moment. And speaking truth to power has definitely been one of the themes of my life. And, acting, singing, writing, channeling, over and over again, doing videos, virtually every day. Yeah, it's like, how can I find my truth? How can I know my truth? And how can I share my truth? And it's a balancing act, for me always to find that truth. I love the Four Agreements. I got to see Don Miguel in person at some point, which was quite inspiring. And these are really high ideals and high values that we're all being asked to walk the talk. So again, I feel filled up already, quite honestly. Where else would you like to take your storytelling and your truth telling today?
Well, Lou, I think that's such a great point that you made, because you are an exceptional example of truth expressed. And when we hear the line, speak truth to power, and we're given examples like Queen Esther, or me in that fight,
I love that.
it comes with like, oh my God, like this is going to kill you. But if you do it slowly, gently, and according to love, it won't push you in the deep end. And when you first started your YouTube channel, that might have been the hardest. The first one might have been the hardest to do, but you just did it. And then you did the next one, and then you did the next one. And then sharing your voice became actually natural. And then you saw it was helpful. And it's like, I think we fear that we're going to go from zero to hero. And it's like, no, you're going to bloom like the lotus flower. Like, you won't have to speak truth to power right away. You're going to slowly develop first of all, what the fuck your truth actually is. So many of us don't even know what it tastes like. We've been so muffled by people pleasing and all the rest of it that we just kind of like, we don't even have a taste for our own truth. So, but you show us how you do that without annihilating yourself, without fear. You show us how you do that gracefully. And that's a really helpful thing. That's what I say about that.
Thank you. Well, that's lovely. I appreciate that. Here we have Joan who wants to jump in. Go ahead, Joan.
Good morning. Oh, Maureen, you were on fire this morning for sure. You spoke to my soul. And I think like one of the things that came up, it's kind of near and dear to my heart is all these LGBTQ bills in the United States going up, and just how like kind of a terrifying time it is. And like we can either be quiet about it and feel uncomfortable about it, or we can talk about it and shout out about it and do all the things that we need to do, because we are complicit in anything, not just this, and any like kind of human injustice.
Yeah.
When we are not speaking out when we see it.
Yes.
And I totally get that fear piece. Like, you know, am I going to make someone in my family unsafe? Am I going to make myself unsafe? But by not speaking, we're making everyone unsafe.
Yeah. And I love this point because it's so applicable. Joan and I both have raised children who are, is it okay if I say this, Joan?
Mhm.
Who are transgender. So God put us together. We're neighbors. Oh, thank God. So we had people to walk through it together with other moms. And I remember when I did my one-person show based on this experience, because I needed to work it out for myself. I needed to taste my own truth. I didn't know what this meant. I didn't know who I was when I walked through the threshold of my son's bedroom when I thought it was my daughter, and how everything would change if I got to the other side of the door. I didn't know. I had a fear of what was going to be killed off. I had a fear that I wasn't capable of walking through the door. So yeah, it was this moment that we meet up with 1,000 times.
Right.
The world is fickle. Things change. We have to be willing to go with it. So I took the show around and I met up with other women who were angry about the treatment of their children in regards to the legal system, and also in the experiences that they were having. And this was in the South, it was in Florida. People were being very, very cruel. And I just decided in that moment that I was not going to experience that I was going to be a hot knife through butter, that I was going to speak my truth, that I was going to bring my truth to every corner that I was invited to, but I was not going to deal with fear or vitriol or shaming or any of that. And they told me, you're going to experience that. You're going to get hate mail. And I knew in myself, I was like, no, I will not. I do not have the consciousness for that.
Okay, that's a great.
Yeah. So it's like, if I develop my consciousness, I can say I will be absolutely helpful without being harmed and without being harmful.
Mm-hmm.
And I claim that, and I get real. I mean, I must have gotten real clear about that, because that has been my experience. And so you too can have that experience. I will not water down my truth, and I will not be burned at the stake because of my truth. Neither of those things are going to happen. I will speak my truth. I will be honored for my truth. And all of the other riffraff will be busy in some other corner.
Wow. Fantastic. That is so inspiring. What a beautiful story. That's
Well, why
brilliant.
not? I mean, if you can
Yeah.
pick your dream, why not pick the one where you don't get harmed?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
No, here's the thing. My husband's a teacher, and he, recently had to go through this teacher education day where he went to, sit on, and I'm telling your story, Will, so if you want to tell it, sit in on learning, how to best advocate for LGBT students in the school system. And as a parent, as someone on the LGBT community, it wasn't like something he needed to do. He understood it. But when he went to it, he was told that there are these laws that are being trying to be passed, like 40 so far this year in every state, that are absolutely horrifying,
Wow.
and that in certain liberal states, they're so ridiculous they won't get passed, but in less liberal states, they will get passed. And but again, you will experience the consciousness in which you live. And you might say, well, what about the whole world? We can take care of where we live, and where you live will affect your experience here, and will affect the way that your family is treated here. And we can't garden other people's gardens. We have to sort of, there's a balance between speaking your truth out into the ethers of everything, and then also like polishing your own shoes. And there's only so much one person can do. And I think the ego can make us feel inept or responsible. And there's a sweet spot somewhere in there where we're neither inept or responsible for everything. It's just like, just do the next right thing. Just do the next right thing. That's just row your boat gently down the stream. That helps me, because I know that the world can tug on us to be much more than we are capable of being in peace. You know, like being in peace is what every action has to come from.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and Maureen, I think that's beautiful. I think there's something also about being a mother, you know, and or being a parent, or being someone who you put your the other person in front of your own, you know, needs and wants, and ask the universe, God, to come through you, you know, so that you can see something that's, you know, is beyond that this moment, so that the situation can find a resolution, you know, to really reach for the stars and do our very best for each other.
yeah, and I think that the script that I was given for that angry man is the same script that we can use for everyone, which is when we meet up with someone living at a low level of consciousness, we can silently say, you're so much better than this. You don't know it yet, but I'm going to know it until you wake up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Beautiful. I also think, of course, this is the way, you know, reality is created, is through our dreams and desires, and that truth again is organic. You know, it has a life of its own. It has a force of its own. Gandhi called it the truth force. You know, I loved your Namyo Haringe Kyo story. That was great. I had some girlfriends back in the day who were doing that, and that was fascinating to learn about that as well. You know, whatever we do that keeps us aligned to the truth, the course, etc., you know, that gives us that energy in the moment when crisis or challenge comes up. And you know, we know we're not alone. We have something else to draw from, and we're open to that, and we're inviting that, you know, to be used by source every day in our lives.
Yeah, and just like you, Lou, like there's certain practices that I go deep on. Like I go deep on A Course in Miracles. I- In regards to chanting, you know, you entertain so many different, you know, people on your YouTube channel who have so many different ways of thinking, but in essence, underneath it all is all the same. It's
Yeah,
all soul food,
yeah,
but each part of it can be used in a different way. So like when moving through thresholds, it is, I think, like in the same way, it's done unto you as you believe. So if you say like, when I lose my wallet and I call out to Saint Michael, I think it is, I mean, it's kind of like a folktale, but like you've placed some credence in it. When you're moving through a threshold and you call out to Ganesha, when you know, when you're trying to be more impeccable with your word and you call out to Martin Luther King, like you can use the different flavors and the different way showers to encourage yourself, and also to meet up with other people of different faiths and flavors and be a well-rounded individual. And that's
mm,
important, I think.
yeah, yeah. Beautiful. um you know, how can we disagree with each other with love and respect without turning our fear and our hatred, or our whatever, you know, into making people enemies? I mean, I think this is the greatest challenge for human beings, you know, is how to fight the good fight without turning the opposition into a source of hatred and fear, you know, to love our enemies, to forgive our enemies, to forgive ourselves, you know. 40 laws about that would affect your children. That's breathtaking. I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're really getting to walk on the wire with this situation.
Yes, but here's the thing. The one cure-all is to ask, why have I projected a world that wants to, invent modern day leopards out of little children who are
Right,
innocent? Why
right.
have I invented that world? And then from there, I get to go, okay, who am I making a leper? Who am I making an untouchable? Let me heal that within myself, and then I'll see a world that's healed. So
Yeah,
all of this, it's not meant to scare me and to shove me back into a home and start building, exit strategies for when the world collapses. It's to empower me to step through the threshold and say, let me get curious about this. You're not a bad person. You're afraid. And a fearful person is not a bad person. It's a person who forgot themselves. Have I forgot myself? Yes. So can I forgive that? Yes. And if I forgive it, then I will be given the curriculum, the silence or the words, the action or the stillness to navigate whatever that is before me without harming anyone, myself included.
beautiful.
Like, I think if we practice that, we will be wildly surprised.
Yes, yes. I mean, I say St. Francis's prayer every day, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace,
Yeah.
yeah, it's holding that space and inviting ourselves to surrender to that space, where the synchronicities and the opportunities and, the invitations and, our own personal lives are in alignment.
Yeah.
It's not perfect. It's messy over and over again, but the
Huh?
mess, the invitation to keep working at it and
Yeah.
keep surrendering to a deeper connection to this higher wisdom, which has no enemies, no opposition.
Yeah, I would say 100% of it can be brought back to my own inner demons. And my own inner demons, like we talked about last week, when we're not impeccable with our words, it's because we're not impeccable with our thoughts. When we're not impeccable with our thoughts, it's because we're still entertaining fears. And those fears are usually self-annihilating. So they're usually like, oh, I don't know how to do this. Nobody loves me. I'm not good. I'm broke. Whatever. I mean, there's a thousand little gnats of nothingness. And it's interesting to look at them and not take them seriously. Like I remember, I told the story on the morning call. Like I remember when my niece asked me to do the flower arrangements at her wedding. Like she just shoved me in a room with a room full of flowers. And I was like, oh, I'm going to fail. I'm going to ruin her wedding. I don't know how to do this. I've never done this before. She's very particular and she's going to want things to be a certain way. And I do not read minds and I do not know how to work with flowers. So I went through that and then I was like, wait a minute. Like I'm a teacher of God. Like I'm an innocent child. Like I am Christ consciousness. What if I'm really good at this? Which was a whole new story. But it's interesting that the ego speaks first and loudest. It's interesting that the ego says, like, you're going to be a minister? How are you going to do a sermon every week? Like, that really ruffled my feathers. I was like, what the hell have I gotten myself into? That is the same thought that meets me at every threshold. Like, how am I supposed to do that? I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do anything. I don't think it's just me. I think it's a universal egoic thought that can keep us really small. But I beg of you to see that as a joke. Like that's the funniest thing you ever heard is your ego telling you you don't know how to do it. Two lullabies of the ego. You don't know how to do it and you ain't got no money. It's always based on scarcity. But those are the two lullabies that will rock us to sleep. Maybe a few others too, but none of them mean anything. I mean, nobody has anything. Everybody comes in butt naked. You know what I mean? We all have within us potential. There's a light within us that cannot fail. If we knew that, what would happen if that was our first thought?
I love this talk. It's so helpful because it's given me, I've noticed more courage to really understand what turning the steering wheel over to Holy Spirit and God. This by petting the ego, the cat in the right direction, by choosing the prayers of Jabez and St. Francis, for being in the moment where I have the tools of gratitude and forgiveness. If I'm in that present moment, slowing down to such magnificent, my little bravery of curiosity, along with laughter, has has given me opportunities that I know for a fact I didn't ego create. And in the simplicity of my life, as the ego did not want, becomes an example of such joy.
Yes.
I was working with a young man yesterday, and I'd like to think I can make people do things, but it doesn't really happen. Technology is a good one, but my helpers, and I thought this person faded out, but he came back because he had a life. He had other things. He's 22. I had such a joyful day. The results were a bonus, but through the day, I was just in awe of
Yeah.
how he showed up, of how his kindness, his stories, his family life. I was more present in that basement, and now it smells like a spa, and the music is just amazing. And it's like, how can this unfold? It unfolds because I'm just running out of ego steam. I can't do it the old way anymore. And if in this example I could find the peace to invite the joy in, I didn't expect it to show up in the form of a 22-year-old kid from Canada who's just a delight. Anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
My guides say when we co-create with spirit, what we've asked for comes out of the blue in the way we least expect it, better than we've imagined possible, revealing our true nature. That's one of my favorite quotes.
I love it. And I love that story, Joni. I mean, it's almost like you can't see your own spiritual evolution. I can't see my own spiritual evolution. I get glimpses of it. I think, yeah, I think I'm doing better than yesterday. And no, I'm definitely doing better than last year or the year before. But it seems so subtle, like we're watching a rose bloom and we can't really measure when it's happening. It's just happening. But everyone else can see it. Everyone else can see can smell the fragrance of your consciousness or the toxicity of your fear. Everyone can smell it. And it's so refreshing to be able to witness somebody wake up and bloom. And that's what we get to see with you. You're noticing in yourself. We're noticing it in you. And it's really wonderful. I mean, that's what you would want to witness in a spiritual community. If everybody got worse, it would be like, oh, this is not working.
What God are we following? Yeah.
Mhm,
No, it's true. It's wonderful, humbling surprises,
mhm.
The other line that comes to mind, Einstein said he only spoke up when his silence would be taken for complicity. And, what's the quote? Is this helpful? Is this true?
Yeah.
Do I need to say this? You've quoted that. And, you know, it's like we're watering this garden of truth in our hearts, truth, love, peace, joy, gratitude, abundance. And then, it wants to share itself with life and the people in our lives. And it will always give us those opportunities, or where we're still stuck, where we're in our own way, where we're not big enough yet or brave enough yet. It's
Yeah.
an amazing feedback, isn't it?
Yes. And in combating that, you'll always have more to grow. You'll always have more to grow. And the ego will look at the horizon and say, I'll never get there. But what it will never do is allow you to look in the rearview mirror and say, look at how far you have come and all of the chains that you have broken for your generational woundings that you've healed. You have done so much. And so if you've done that much in this short of time, imagine you'll get there. You'll continue to grow. Arriving is just staying in the state of presence.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
Yoshi had a question in the chat, which
sure.
I'll read. I'm not sure. She says, how is it that we create or imagine these bad things collectively as miracle workers? When the topic of attack on trans comes up, we know what we're talking about. So it's not our story. It's not your story. It somehow becomes our story. There's a thing called mass conscious agreement. And we have our own personal individual agreements that dictate our experience. And then there is the mass conscious agreements, some of them conscious, some of them unconscious, in which we also swim. Like Kyo at the end of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, the thread, to say that has nothing to do with me, to say that story is not my story, is to detach my thread from the fabric of God. I'm part of this story. And only from being part of the story can I help to heal this story. But to say that's the other people is to have division. It's more helpful if I help myself weave in, like you would say, if there's a glass of toxic water and you just keep pouring in clear water, eventually, you will get to a clearer state, not from staying in your own glass, but actually from merging, allowing yourself to merge and to merge in the internal landscape of saying, this hatred that I see is what I be. I will take 100% responsibility for it. It doesn't feel good, but that is just burning off of the ego. It's better if I take 100% responsibility for it, because then I can help to heal it. Prior to that, I can't.
Right. We only have power what we take responsibility for. Beautiful. Yoshi.
Yeah, so what you've said is helpful. What I was getting to with my question was, I think we agree, and I'm not speaking for everyone, but I think we agree that the attacks on trans people is just ugly. So when we have this, mass consciousness, shared consciousness, it's like, why do we accept the bad things that we know are not true to our holy nature? Why as a group with a particular topic do we get so off of our path? We think, it's not progress we can measure, right? But like you say, I'm pretty sure I'm doing better than I was last year or the year before, most of the time, but not all the time, right? But I'm getting better at recognizing when I'm off the path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, violence towards trans, violence towards Jewish people, violence towards Palestinians, violence towards women, violence towards children. It's not specific to any one person. It's just like going into, the ice cream store. There's 1,000 flavors of violence towards myself in different forms. And what comes to mind is when I was a little kid, my mother died and I was in pain, heartbroken, as was every child in our house. And there was 8 of us. And we had used to go and pick flowers in the garden for my mom. And once she died, we took up this ritual where we would go and rape gardens. We would just pick every flower there was and we would bring them home. And it was violent. It was totally violent. And I didn't know why I was doing it, but it felt like an exorcism. But I was a child. I didn't even know the word exorcism. I just felt like I'm angry. I want my mother. And beauty was assaulting to me. And so I just kill it and trespass against it. And my sisters told me to do it. And I was the littlest kid, so I just followed. One day, this woman came out on her porch. She was in shock. We had raped every flower. And she just looked at us and she said, "What have you done?" And we stood frozen in her yard, dropping our flowers to the ground. And I was like, what have we done? And the words that come to me are when Jesus says, "Forgive them, they know not what they do." So when you see someone in such pain that they're raping and they're pillaging and they're, just know they have no idea. They lost their minds. They're crying for their moms and they have no resources to figure out how to connect with her. If that doesn't bring some drops of compassion, we just have to have compassion and not division, but compassion. Compassion, C-O-M, means to go with your passion, to you come with my passion. We don't have to understand it, but let's not fight it. because that's conflict. But to come together, then we can solve something. Then you can ask the right question, like, why would you do that? And I can start to question, why would I do that? I don't know. I don't know why I did that, but I know that that's not really who I am.
Powerful. Yoshi, thank you. Linda Sheehan says, John O'Donohue said, the one person we know we will never meet in person is ourselves. So it's hard to see our own progress. We are absorbed in the current story. That was a powerful share about your childhood, Maureen.
Yeah. And in my childhood, I didn't have the answer, but having gone through that, I know today when I share that story, I don't share it in shame. There's a little bit of remorse, but mostly it's now a teaching tool, not to harm myself or harm anyone else, but if all of your traumas can be transformed into teaching tools, fuck yes. Hey, I want to show you one more thing that I got that I wanted to celebrate. I found
Okay.
this
Yeah.
love more.
Yes, please. Yes, ma'am. You're doing it.
Very happy about that.
Yes, thank you.
So yeah, I mean, these are great questions. These are great questions, and we're walking each other through the threshold, and we're waking up together, and we're all doing such wonderful things. Such wonderful progress is happening, and we're gonna find ourselves on holy ground and forgive ourselves for all of those, warring children, but not to judge them.
Yeah, yeah. The last thought, I know Clive, I think, is raring to go here. The last thought is, violence and hatred are when people don't feel like they have any other way to communicate their pain and their powerlessness, and it doesn't make it okay. Just like your little girl trashing someone's garden, but compassion is the care that's born out of sorrow. And when we've all suffered and grow through our sorrows, then hopefully we have that compassion, that strength, and that willingness to try to hear people more deeply so they don't feel like they have to express themselves through violence and hatred. That would be my prayer for today.
I join you in that.
Thank you.
Thanks,
God bless.
Lou.
You're very welcome, Maureen. God bless you. Thank you.